In this video, we're going to look at compositing and putting together 4 images that don't belong to each other and kind of making it not as somewhat of a collage, but I call it collage, but bringing these images together, making them seem like they fit. Now, this one I could have done a little bit more work on, obviously, but the idea is we're going to grab a landscape or some type of environment picture like I did here with the desert, a human, some type of human form, anything at all. You could just use the head or the feet or the whole body. Some type of natural element, so a tree or a plant or a flower or an animal, something that comes from nature, and then something that's unnatural, something that's man-made, anything like that. So that's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to get started by actually making my artboards and setting my artboards up in Photoshop. So Command N or File New. And I know that my first one, I'm going to name this properly. It's always good to name your files properly before you even get started. Last name, first initial section number, and of course, collage. And 1600 by 1200 pixels. So make sure you're on pixels. This is for digital display. And it is going to be for digital, so therefore its resolution is 72 pixels per inch. Make sure it's per inch. And RGB is totally fine to start with, and well, it's going to be digital, so that's what we would use. Now, using artboards in Photoshop is great because you could now have many artboards, many canvases that you could work with in Photoshop, which is awesome, instead of having only one canvas and many documents open. Now, I can start with artboards, click it on, and what's going to happen, I'm going to create. And here it is. I have my first artboard, artboard number 1. And what the artboards actually show up as in the layer panel is kind of like this heading here. It's almost like a grouped layer where you could twirl them up, twirl them down. That's kind of what it is, but you could have many artboards in one workspace, which is great. Now, the also good thing that happens here is once you click on Artboard, the Artboard Tool shows up, which is underneath the Move tool. So if you long click or right click, you'll find the Artboard Tool. If you click on the layer, the Move tool shows up. If you click on the Artboard tool shows up. Now I'm in Adobe Photoshop 2024. Some changes have been made over time. So what I want to show you now is if I didn't do it this way. So if I actually did not have my artboard set up right away, that's okay. We can do it right away. Command N, once again, 1600, 1200, everything's the same. And this time I'm going to click off of artboards. So I just normally have a canvas. This is great. What I can do, I'm going to click on my lock to unlock the background or this one layer that I have here. I could take any amount of artboard or layers and convert them to an artboard. How you do that, select the layers you want, go to your drop down here and artboard from layers. And that's it. The exact same thing is going to happen. If I press OK, the exact same thing is going to happen as I just had it if I set up my artboards at the beginning in my new document. So I'm in the exact same space as I was before. Okay. So you could either do it right away or you can do it later on inside. Now what I want to do, I do want to label these properly. I want to label all my artboards properly because what's going to happen at the end when I export all my artboards, the name of the artboard layer will also be the name of the file. So I'm going to call this Workspace 1. And I always love putting the dimensions of what that workspace is as well. So my workspace for this assignment is going to be 1600 by 1200. And that's great. Now what I want to show you right now is I'm going to show you how to make artboards, how to change the dimensions of artboards, and then we're going to bring in our images, play around, and then we're going to export. So it's going to work like that. So I have my first artboard. So now there's many different ways to duplicate or make more artboards. Number 1, we see right away with my Artboard tool selected, I can click on these plus signs and they will just add more artboards. And look, they add more artboards. They don't name them. They just say Artboard 1 and 2. That's fine. I could go up, I can go down, I can do whatever I want. So, and they keep it in this kind of grid-like structure. So I'm going to undo that. What I could also do, just like with artboards, I could with my Artboard tool, I can click and drag. If I click and drag any size I want, there's another artboard. Great, and it just adds it right there. I could also change the dimensions of my current artboard. Now I can't really see, well, I can see my dimensions up here, but to be on the safe side, what I'm also going to open is my properties panel. My properties panel will also allow me to see my width and height, my X and Y position if I want to change those, just in case you don't have it open, window, and properties. So now that I have everything there, I'm just going to say, oh, you know what? I messed that up. Not a problem. 1200, enter, and there's that. So I can change up my dimensions with the Artboard tool open on my control panel up here or my properties panel. That's it. Very simple. Another way to add more artboards is once again, drop down and new artboard. I could do that. Just like layers, I could Command J. Command J is how we use the keyboard shortcuts to duplicate a layer. And this time, not only did it bring it over, but it also gave me the name of my last one, just copy, which is good because now it's just easier. I can just say Workspace 2, and that's it. Now what I like to do, I like to organize these so I can just click and drag, just like layers can. That's why it's in the layer panel. Artboard does not have its own panel in Photoshop. It's all connected inside the layer panel, which is great. I'm going to do that again, but instead of Command J, I'm just going to do another method. Hold down Option, click and drag down, and now I have Workspace 3. Now this one, unfortunately, when I did that, it overlapped, but that's okay. When I click on it, I have my Artboard tool selected. I can just click and drag. And because I have my Smart Guides on, it'll align it with my Smart Guides. Kind of. Doesn't do a great job right now. I'm getting a little glitchy at the moment, but generally it does a pretty good job, and that's totally fine. Now I'm going to need two more. Oh, sorry, I need to label that one properly. No, I moved the wrong one, and that's okay. Because what I can do with my Artboard tool selected, I can click and click the names. I can click the artboard. Well, no, I can't click the artboard. Can I click the edge of the artboard? I can click the edge of the artboard. So if I click inside the artboard, not much happens. But if I click the word, the name on top, or the edge of the artboard, I could select and move things around. So I'm just going to move Workspace 3 here. I'm just going to do this in the way my layers are set up. I'm also going to make it that way. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, kind of that idea. And that's it. Very simple. Now I'm going to make 2 more artboards. I'm actually going to do it here on the workspace. So I'm showing you many different ways you can make new artboards. I'm actually going to hold on Option in my workspace, not in my layer panel. I'm just going to click and drag and bring it down. And there I am. I have my next workspace. I'm going to bring it down here. Now this is my Insta. So my 3 compositions I'm going to make. This one's going to be my Instagram composition or my artboard. And now this one's going to be 1080, 1350. So this is the largest currently, at the moment, the largest post size you can make for Instagram. And I'm going to now have to change those dimensions because they're incorrect. So I'm going to do it here in the property panel. So I have my artboard selected, 1080 and 1350. That's it. I could have also done that up here as well. And I'm going to duplicate that one more time. Line it up here. Doesn't really matter. And once again, I'm going to drag it down. So it's in order, Workspace 1, 2, 3, Instagram. And now this one's going to be my Facebook. And I will make this, I hate when that happens. And this is going to be 1200 by 628, which is a common size, post size for Facebook. All right, there we go. Good, I have them all, but now I just have to fix up my dimension here. 1200 and 628. And I am good. There we go. So the idea here is you're going to make these 3 compositions utilizing these 4 elements that you're going to bring in. I'm going to show you in just a second. Then you're going to take your favorite composition and make an Instagram post out of it and a Facebook post out of it. Very simple. But the idea is you're going to take all the same content and have to move things around potentially to make them fit in this space or in this space. That's kind of what we do as designers quite a bit, obviously. So I have my workspaces set up, or so my artboard set up in the workspace. I have unlimited space to use, which is fantastic. But this is what I have right now, and this is all I need for the setup. Now, another good thing you can do to play around in your layer panel, your artboards, because now we have all these artboards, and only one of, oh, they all have, do they all have? Yes, they all have one layer with them. There we go. What I can do, I can right click on the eye, and I could change up the colors of them. So it kind of helps me out. So what I could do, I could actually individually say, this one's red, or I selected them all. I could say this one's red, this one's orange, this one's yellow. I'm just right clicking, and now this will just help me because I'm going to have a lot of layers going on here, and I'm also going to have another 4 layers or 4 artboards I'm going to bring in. Or you could say, I want all of these to be red and just these ones to be different, and my other artboards to be a different color. Color coordinating is just much easier. If you right click on the layer, not the eye, there always still be down here as well. And in 2024, more colors were added, which is great. So it helps us differentiate between the artboards. So now what I'm going to do, I already have my pictures down here, but I'm going to show you a couple different ways. If you go online, I love going to Pexels. Pexels is a great one. Unsplash is another great website, and Pixabay is another great website. I really enjoy them, but Pexels, for some reason, for me, I just found it a little bit better, a little bit easier. I like it. So if I just want to type in a human and I want to find a human, there's many different pictures I can find. Actually, this is kind of a nice one. If I just want something up front now, you have to be very smart about which pictures you're going to choose. Because you're going to be doing 3 different compositions, maybe you want to do 3 different things with them. So if I did choose this element, I could maybe zoom in closer to just the upper body or the lower body, but it's just the back. So I don't have a face. So you have to be careful of which pictures you choose, because maybe you're going to want to focus on a certain area and you could play around a little bit more. And now these images from Pexels or Unsplash or Pixabay or many of these great resources, they're good quality images. They're large dimension and the quality is really good. So when you bring them in, you're probably going to scale them down, which is a good thing. If you find yourself scaling up too much, it's going to look pixelated. It's probably not going to flow well with your composition. So what I'm going to do one at a time because I want to show you some things here. First, I'm going to bring in my landscape. My landscape's right here. I found it on Pexels, and you have these amazing artists and photographers that are here that have given their work here. So we want to give kudos to them for thanking them for doing that great work, and we can utilize their work. So here in Photoshop, what I'm going to do, I'm going to drag in. So there's a couple different ways I can do this. If I drag in my image directly into the workspace, now I'm going to do it two ways. If I drag it with nothing selected, look, none of my artboards are selected. I'm deselecting everything. If I drag in any picture, any pixels into the workspace with nothing selected, it's just going to float there. It's just going to be there. Now, this is a bit of a glitch happening. That's okay. I could put it anywhere I want in my artboard, and it'll just float there, and that's fine. Now, normally, if you realize in Photoshop, you cannot do that in the workspace. But once you're in artboard mode, you have one artboard, you can now utilize the workspace around it to actually hold information. So I'm going to press enter, and there's my image. It's just kind of hanging out there. Now, Photoshop doesn't know what to do with this image, so it just pushes it to the top and just says, hey, it's at the top, do what you want with it. Here are the pixels, whatever, which is great. So I can utilize the workspace now a little bit better. However, I'm still going to convert this into an artboard. Now, what also happened when I dragged it into the workspace, it converted automatically to a smart object, which is great. Smart objects are great. Now, I really actually don't need smart objects here because I'm not going to be doing any editing to the original pixels, but not a bad idea, but I will play around with that. Now, another way we could do this is open that image up directly into Photoshop. So drag it here into that, or File, Open, and now I have the pixels here. And then from here, in its own document, its own tab, I could click and drag and bring it into my document. And there it is, exact same one, great, beautiful. But now this time when I did it that way, it is not a smart object, which either way, it's okay because they're both the original pixels. These ones are just protected, these ones are not. But once again, I'm not actually going to be using these pixels. I'm just going to click and drag them. Then I'm going to mess around with those pixels. So two different ways to bring in an image. Either way, like I said, it doesn't matter, whichever one you chose, that is great. Of course, I could also click off the lock, copy, Command C, and then Command V, same idea. All right. So instead of just clicking and dragging. So here I have my picture with my pixels there. I'm going to convert this into a layer. So I'm just going to take this layer it's selected, I could either go to my drop down or just right click, and I can make artboard from layers. And there it is. Now I have an artboard. I'm going to call this one landscape or environment, whatever. And because I never really knew the dimensions, I don't have to worry about it. They're here right now. So if I clicked on that, I'd see the dimensions. I'm fine with that. Now, a little side note, if you wanted to, there's a bunch of presets here that Adobe gives us, Photoshop gives us, iPads and Apple Watches and Macs and Microsoft Surface. If you ever needed to know what the dimensions were and you didn't want to look it up, well, they're all right here for you. But that's just a side note. I'm just going to say, okay, and there it is. There's my landscape. I'm just going to move it over here. Fantastic. I'm good. Now, I'm going to continue to do the same things with my other images. I'm going to drag this one in. Drop. Now, notice what happened on that one. I'm going to delete that. Because I had something selected, when I dragged it in, let me actually select this artboard here. When I drag it in, it's going to automatically connect to that artboard. Now, that's actually not good, because what Photoshop likes to do, it likes to take the pixels and make them fit into that workspace or that artboard or that canvas. And that's not good, because yes, it is a smart object and it is retaining all that information, the original pixels, but it's kind of deceiving where we think the image is actually smaller than it actually is, and it's not. So that's the image it's saying it is, but if I have nothing selected and I bring in that same image, those are the actual pixels that it is. So it's kind of deceiving. So I'm going to press enter. I'm going to click on that turtle. I don't want it. So ideally, when you do bring in images, make sure that they are nothing selected and you just bring in the images on their own. I click on this one, and once again, I'm going to convert this one to an artboard as well. Artboard from layers. And I'll call this one natural. This is my natural. And I'll say, okay, and there it is. Great. And I'm going to continue on. So here I have nothing selected. I'm going to drag in my other. And there it is. There's my human. And once again, if this happens to you, don't worry about it. Put it down, press enter, and you're good. I'm going to convert this to an artboard from layers. Yep. And I will call this one my human. There I go. There's my other artboard. Now, my last image I'm going to bring in this image. Now, I had a bit of issue with it earlier, but I just found another one. I'm just going to bring it in. When I bring it in here, oh, nothing selected. Once again, nothing selected. I bring it in, and it's actually rather small. It's not correct, and I know it should be bigger than that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to drag it into Photoshop on its own tab, and I see the proper dimensions here. Now what I can do, I'll click and drag, bring it in. So if you do have that issue where the image is not showing up properly, it's too small, open it up in its own document in Photoshop, File, Open, or just drag it onto the Photoshop icon, open it up, and then drag it in, and then you have it there. And once again, right click, and new group, new artboard from layers. And then I'll just call this unnatural. And we say, okay, that's it. Now I could collapse those. And once again, I could color coordinate these, but maybe these are all the gray ones. That's fine. And everything else is, I'm going to keep the same color. That's totally fine. Now, once again, whether these are smart objects or not, I can convert them to smart objects. So this one is not. I'm going to right click and make smart object, or convert to smart object. Now I could do that. However, that's just, once again, protecting the original pixels. But once I bring it in, I'm probably going to have to rasterize it because I'm going to play around and mess around the original pixels. So it's up to me how I want to play around with that. Either way, I'm happy. Now, the one thing I do want to show you as well is to find images on Google. I found this image on Google. So I was able to go to Google and I typed in toaster, or any image you want. I go to images. Now, to get a larger quality image, because I look at all these and I don't know what the dimensions are, they could be really small, they could be decent size. I'm going to go up to my gear icon and I'm going to go to advanced search. Now, I know I'm going to go to any size. I know that, a larger is 400 by 300. It is actually not that big. All these are actually not too big. My current pixels are 1600 by 1200 that I want to fit. So even that's not going to work. So what I will work with is either larger than 6 or 8 megapixels. So I'm going to click on that. And now I'll do an advanced search with 6 megapixel, larger than 6 megapixel, and then I found that lovely image. There it is, view image, and I can right click save, and then I should have that there. So there's another way to find images, just in case you're Unsplash or Pexels or Pixabay, or if you have Envato or whatever, you want to find some images, that you can go and look for them online, which is great too, on Google. Okay, so now with that, what I want to do is I'm going to start bringing in some of the images. Now, I've made this already. Now, I'm not going to show every little thing here, but what I will show some basic ideas on how to play with this, just so we have an idea. So I'm going to take my landscape first, and I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to start in my workspace number 1. So I'm going to hold down Option and click and drag. Now, there's a bit of an issue that can occur when you're moving some pictures around from artboard to artboard. So I'm going to click and drag and bring it down. And holding down Option, I click and drag and I bring it down. The way it has to work is it has to be released first from its workspace. It's an initial artboard, I should say. And I'm going to bring it onto my other artboard right here. Let's see what happens. Okay, that worked. Great. But what happens is if I try to move it over, say bring it to my workspace number 2 and I let go, it's still on workspace number 1 or artboard number 1. Instead, what I have to do, once again, I have to fully release it from the artboard. Then I could drag it over and see where that goes. Okay, it went there. Even though a lot of it was hanging over on workspace 3, artboard 3, I would still need to make sure that worked. Now, if that doesn't work and is giving me issues and I'm having trouble trying to connect it to a certain workspace, that's okay. I could just find it here. Actually, this one here, and I could just bring it down to click and drag, hold down Option, bring it down to workspace 2, or hold down Option, click and drag, bring it down to workspace 3. So I can always move them around manually on the artboards here, or on the layer panel. So that's up to you what you want to do there. So I'm going to bring this back over here. There it is. I'm Command T or Edit, Free Transform, and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. Now, once again, each of these compositions should be different. So even the landscape would be played with a little bit differently. It's entirely up to you. And if you want as well, you could have a different human in it. You could have a different landscape, maybe for another composition. I want you to play around, have some fun with it. So there's my landscape, and ideally, what I want to do here on Workspace, well, I want to label these properties. So that's my landscape. Great. And probably what I'll do is I'm going to not have this as a smart object anymore. I'm going to rasterize the layer so I can just play with the pixels any way I want. Now, same with the turtle. I'm going to bring the turtle down. I'm just going to do it here. Instead of moving it down here, I'm going to do it right here. I'm going to connect it, hold on Option, click and drag, and bring it to my workspace number 1. There it is. I'm going to make it not a smart object anymore. I'm going to scale it down. Now, keep in mind, when you scale it down, right now the turtle is actually massive in this composition. Maybe I want that. Maybe I want it to be like this huge turtle or whatever. That's how I'm going to play with it here. Maybe in this composition, it's much smaller. Maybe in this composition, it's much bigger. You have to play around, but remember, your original pixels are always there. Now I'm going to do the same thing with my human. I'm going to click and drag, hold on, Option, bring it down to my workspace number 1. There it is. Command T, bring it down. Maybe I want my human to be a decent size. I'm not there yet, but I'm happy with that. And lastly, my toaster. Hold on, Option, click and drag. Now all my elements are in one workspace. One artboard, I should say. I keep on saying artboard and workspace because I've called them workspace. I call them workspaces, but really these are artboards. I'm going to try to stay artboard a little bit more. So now, a quick way to remove the background, because obviously these collage, the way I'm going to wrap these around and play around, they're not working. I want only the one landscape in the background to work. So to quickly do this, there's a number of different ways, but to quickly make sure I remove the background, some are easier than others, and some I could always work with. I'm going to click on my layer. Sorry, I'm going to rasterize that layer. Same with this one. And what I'll do is I'm going to click on the one layer, and in the properties panel, there's a very quick way to do this. With my selection tool on, my layer selected, I can click and remove background. And look how well it did that. That's great. So I'm going to shut that off for a second. And look, my layer mask is still there. I want to see the layer masks. I want to see a layer mask that's next to it. When you clicked on remove background, what Photoshop did automatically, it selected the subject and removed the background. So I have white, which shows the toaster, and the black that hides everything else. Now I'm going to click on the human, the same thing. I'm going to call it human. Now, unfortunately, no, it wasn't unfortunate. I named the landscape layer landscape. You need to label all your layers, especially these layers. Or you could just call it the natural. It's up to you. And I'm going to double click here, and this is my turtle. But I could, once again, I could call landscape, natural, human, unnatural. It's entirely up to you. So here I am with the human. Once again, now humans can be a little trickier. I'm going to zoom in, Command plus, Command minus to zoom out. Because the hair is like that, let's see how good a job Photoshop does with just removing the background. Now, if I just select the subject, it'll show me now it's missing a bit of the toe. It did a pretty good job here. Maybe I could play around there. It's cutting out some of that hair, but maybe that's okay for this particular project. If I just go straight to make a mask, because my selection is made, it's the exact same thing as clicking on remove background right away. It selects and then masks. If I just choose select subject, it selects a subject, and then if I click on the mask, it'll do the exact same thing that remove background did. So there's my background. Once again, I can play around. I was like, you know what? I'm having a bit of issue. I want to bring that toe back. Well, because it's a mask, I could click on my brush tool. If I paint black, I'm removing elements. Let me bring down my brush tool using my open bracket. It makes it smaller. My brush, if I want to make it bigger, is close bracket. So open bracket and close bracket. Because it's a brush, I have that control, or I could also right click and control my size of my brush and the hardness of my brush. So I'm going to make it soft. And if I paint black, I'm removing. So I'm hiding. I'm not deleting, I'm just hiding. If I paint white, I'm bringing it back. So I got to be careful here. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And I just want to bring back those toes that were missing. There we go. And now I brought back a little too much. That's okay. I switch it over. And now I'm just going with my soft brush. I'll just do a quick version of that. So there's that lovely little toe. Now, if I had a little bit of issue there, maybe once again, I can clean this up so you can clean up your masks really, really well. I'm going a little bit faster just for the sake of getting this done. Now, in some situations, you might not be able to tell, and that's okay. Now, the hair actually turned out really well, so I'm going to kind of leave that alone. There's a bit of a softness around some of the areas. If I press X, it'll switch these two when I have my paintbrush on. If I press X, it'll switch foreground and background, so I'm just pressing X. And now I could quickly bring back, some of those elements there. Press X again, and I can hide some of those elements. All right, so I'm pretty fine with that. Plus, I'm not really getting a good idea of it yet because I have this turtle in the background. So let's continue on. So same, I'm going to remove the background. Now, once again, I could have selected subject and clicked on the mask, but I just wanted to show you that. And I'm just going to shut these all up, and that's kind of it. So now I have my 3 objects. I could play around. So now what I want to do, I'm going to just start positioning things. I'm going to scale them down. Now remember, if you scale this down and you bring it into the other composition and you want it to be bigger, you might have to, because it's not a smart object, you might have to start over again, bring this in and remove the background, which works really, really well. So it kind of goes pretty fast. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to mimic this one I've made already. I'm just going to show you some fast ways to do that. So I'm going to bring down my toaster here, kind of making a silly composition. I'm going to select my tortoise and I'm going to bring my human down. I'm just selecting in Command T, which is free transform, as I've shown you already. Edit and free transform. Now, in some situations in Photoshop, you might have to hold down Shift to keep it in proportion. In mine, Shift actually distorts it. So I'm going to let that go and not have to press Shift, but always make sure when you're scaling, scale proportionally, make sure you're doing it correctly. So I don't want this to be flattened or whatever. You can usually tell, most human eye can tell when something is squished or stretched. We want to keep it proportional. So there is my current, playing around here a little bit. So I'll have my human kind of more in the background. I'll have my toaster in the foreground with the turtle. And that's it. Maybe I rotate the turtle, Command T, a little rotation here. Maybe it's sitting on that landscape a little bit better. Now, that's easy. That's done. I brought in my elements, I removed the backgrounds, and I positioned them. I scaled them down, and that's it. Am I done? No. So the idea here is we have to make it seem like all these elements belong together, as if there was a photographer that set up the scene and took a picture, and there happened to be this human here, and this animal here, and this other object here. Now, they do not fit into the scene. I could do a better job. So this is where my adjustment layers come in, blending modes, clipping masks, and we want to see all of those. Well, maybe not blending modes, but they do help. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to play around with the human, because I know the human's a little set further back, but if we look at the scene currently of the landscape here, this beautiful desert in the sky, we know, and we can also tell by the shadows that and if I click on this one, I see that the cast shadows are coming out this way. So therefore, the light is over here. Now, all of these have different light sources. On this one, the light source, you see the shadow here, so light source may be on top and down a little bit. The light source, I feel like there's light source actually coming up here. So I'm not going to be able to make every light source perfect, but what I can try to do is make the element, the object, fit into the scene a little bit better using adjustment layers. So let's start playing around with the human. I'm going to bring the human up top. The adjustment layers are down here, but you can find them here. You could also find them under Window and Adjustments, and then all those adjustments will show up as well here. Now there's generative adjustments, which I don't necessarily use, especially now I need to control them custom anyways. So I'm just going to leave those alone, but I like using these adjustments down here. So I'm going to start with the brightness and contrast. Now I feel that she's very bright for the scene, so I'm going to bring down the brightness a little bit. Now notice, because I'm moving that around, it's affecting everything below the adjustment layer. The adjustment layer is here, so everything is being affected. This is where clipping masks come in. I only want this adjustment layer to affect this layer. I only want this to show through these pixels. So to make a clipping mask, I'm going to hold down Option. I'm going to hover between the two layers, and I get this little cursor that shows up. Let me zoom in a little bit. I get this cursor that shows up, and I hold on Option, and I click. And now that these pixels are only showing through these pixels. So you can see, once again, I'm going to release it. I'm going to hold on Option again, hover between the two layers, click, and now it releases that clipping mask. I'm going to do it again, hold on Option and click, or I could click on the layer above, right click, and create clipping mask. Same idea. All right, so now these pixels are only affecting these pixels. It's only showing through these pixels. So let's play around. So once again, I could play around, exaggerate, so I know what I don't want to be. So now as I'm playing around, I see, I want the human to be a little more faded. And I'm kind of happy with that. And I could always shut it off and see what it did. Yeah, it did a pretty good job. I'm going to zoom back out. I'm going to now play around with my hue saturation. Let's also, maybe because she's a little bit further away, I'm going to bring down that saturation just a little bit. And once again, because I'm doing that, I forgot to make the clipping mask. That's okay. Let me go back here, hold on Option, click in between the layers. And now that it's also clipped to this layer, these two layers are only affecting this layer. Or as we could say, these pixels are only showing through these pixels here. So I could play around. Yes, can I play around with my hue? Of course, I could kind of be silly, have some fun. My lightness, my darkness, where do I want to go? What I like to do sometimes is actually do a full exaggeration and bring back visually where I kind of think I want it to be. I don't want it to be too dark. I want it to fit in nicely. There we go. I'm kind of happy with that. I can play with that more later. I'm just kind of moving around, just giving you an idea of the process here. Now the next I'll work with the turtle. And same idea. I'm going to play around the turtle. And you know what I want to do with the human too? I forgot. The three main ones I usually use are hue, saturation, brightness, contrast. And I also like to play around with color balance. So I'm going to click on color balance, and I really like this one too because now I can make it warm, play around with the temperature. But I have control over shadows, midtones, and highlights. So I'll start with the shadows first because they're not as strong. There's not many shadows here. I'm just going to warm them up, a little bit of red. Start having a bit of a slow motion here. I'm going to go with the midtones, which are a little stronger. There's a little bit more midtone here. Or that was the midtone. Oh, sorry, I did the midtone. My computer's going a little bit slow right now. And I'm going to bring up, now the highlights are where we really want to be careful, not too much. Just want to make it warmer. So if I shut it off, turn it on, we see what the warmth does, especially in this situation where you have the orange of this beautiful sand, maybe potentially reflecting the sun on. So maybe it's going to be a little bit warmer as opposed to cooler. So I'm going to say okay, and I'll leave that alone. So now let's work on the tortoise. Same idea, brightness, contrast. Now once again, what do I see with the turtle? Once again, I got to make a clipping mask. What do I see with the turtle? Could it be brighter? Should it be darker? Well, I feel, you know, just playing around, seeing how it fits into the scene a little bit. And once again, if I'm not happy with it, I could always move it around. And same with the turtle. I'm also going to add in my hue, saturation, clipping mask right away. Maybe I'll bring up the saturation a little bit. Just actually the way it works right now, it actually works really well with that extra saturation. It happens to have a little bit of orange on it as well, so which really works well here. Now, a majority of your elements you bring in, they're probably not going to match, so you probably will have to do quite a few adjustments or make quite a few adjustments to make sure they work well. So I'm just going to do a very similar situation I did with the human. I'm going to do a hue, saturation, brightness, contrast, color balance, and I need to make that a clipping mask. Shadows, same idea. I like to warm it up. In this situation, this is what it calls for. Maybe yours, you have like an underwater situation and you need it to be, you know, cooler tones of blue. So maybe you'd add in more cyan. So now we see what it's doing here. We turn it on and off, and kind of, I like what I've done there. And I really do believe it fits into the scene much better like that. Now the toaster, this is kind of a tricky situation because it's so metallic and in the desert, it's kind of odd, but I'm still going to play with it. Same idea. Brightness, contrast. Maybe I could do a levels. Maybe I could play around with the curves. I just like using these ones. You could choose any adjustment layers you want. That will help you fit these into the scene a little bit better. Make a clipping mask right away. Now I feel it is very bright, so I kind of want to bring it down a little bit because it stands out of the scene a little too much. And the contrast. Now remember, because it's closer to the viewer, the contrast the detail might be a little bit better, but there's already so strong highlights on this particular piece, so that's okay. I'm just working around with it. Hue, saturation, play around with the hue if I want, but clipping mask. But I'm not going to, just bring that back to 0. Saturation, well, there's not much color on this anyways. And lightness or brightness, yeah, maybe I bring it up a little bit. Yeah, maybe I'm fine with that. Maybe I really didn't need hue, saturation. Maybe it didn't do too much for me. That's okay. I could still keep it. I could play around with it later. Color balance, once again, I'm not too concerned with. So I'm just going to leave it alone. I kind of almost want it to stand out a little bit. It's almost like too silly that it's there, and I'll have it stand out a little bit, which is totally fine. Now, the other thing I probably want to do with these elements is make them fit in the scene. I probably should add little cast shadows because there's light somewhere. And the cast shadows will probably help me kind of fit it into the scene a little bit better. Now, there's a couple different ways to make cast shadows. The one way we could do this is we can just add a drop shadow. So if I double click and add a layer style. So if I double click anywhere here on the open space of a layer, or if I click on the effects icon down at the bottom, I could add in any of my layer styles. But the way I like to do it, I like to double click. And I'm going to add a drop shadow. Now, this is not the method I'm going to use, but I can play around with the direction of the drop shadow, the distance of the drop shadow, where it is. Like you see, it's kind of, there's a drop shadow there, but really it should just be down there. The spread, the size, you can do it that way. I'm not going to do it that way because it's not really working for me. Another way to do that is actually to duplicate your object, double click, on that layer style again, and color overlay, just make it black. I'll say okay. And now what I can do potentially is kind of, flip it. I'm gonna Command T, right click and flip vertical. And what that does, it actually will flip it like this, the opposite way, and now I can say that's my drop shadow. Once again, kind of working, kind of not working. I'm not loving that. I could also shear it. So I could right click again, I'm still in the free transform, and I could skew or shear, and I can kind of make it, as if there's this shadow happening here, which isn't horrible. And once again, I could, fade that out with the opacity. Now, those are two methods. The method I'm going to choose, I'm actually going to delete that. I'm actually going to make my own shape here. Yeah, gotcha. I keep on getting that there. I'm going to use my pen tool, and I'm just going to kind of play around because I know that the shadows are coming this way. So I'm just going to kind of play around with that. I'm going to click and click here, and I'm going to make this like kind of a longer shape and just kind of get an idea of what the toaster would look like. If I did this properly, yes, I would be there, and then this light would be there, how I would do that properly. But for now, I'm just playing around, and there is my shadow underneath the toaster, the element, whatever was there. Now, obviously, that doesn't work very well. That doesn't look great, does it? So what I could do, I'm going to bring down the opacity of it at the beginning. But I also know that this shadow potentially will fade. So I'm going to add a mask to this shadow right here. Click on the mask. Now I have a mask. It's a white mask. I could invert the mask so it's already gone. I paint it back in. But what I'll do is instead, I'm going to grab a brush, click on my mask. Make sure your mask is selected, not your pixels. The mask is selected. And I'm going to paint black. But in order to do this properly, I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. And I'm going to make sure I have a soft brush. So I'm going to right click and make sure my brush is, once again, 0% hardness. And I'm going to also make sure that the opacity of my brush is like, say, 10%. So I'm going to slowly remove, and it's going to fade much nicer. So as I just start to paint a little bit, I'm just slowly kind of bringing it in. And now what I want the darker hues down here, the darker value underneath, and I want it to kind of like fade out. So now that kind of has a better sense of that there's a shadow there, and it looks really, really good. Now, if I want to duplicate that, make it even stronger, I can. And I've duplicated it. Or once again, I could just bring up the opacity that I took down and make it kind of stronger depending on how my shadow works. But what I want to do, try to make sure is make those consistent. So I'm going to do the same thing for the turtle. And once again, for the turtle, I could duplicate it, hold on Option, click and drag to the bottom, double click, color overlay black. Okay, I can click on that, Command T, right, go to flip vertical, and there is my turtle kind of connected that way. But once again, I might not do it that way. What I can do instead, I'll make a path underneath the turtle, and I'm going to make it kind of look that way too, kind of way I did up here as well. I'm just going to add this kind of interesting little shadow. So maybe from this foot, and maybe the head pokes out a little bit, from this foot to that foot, a little bit of a cast over here, and maybe there was the foot over there connected back to this foot, and there you go. There's my path. Okay, I'm going to bring it down a bit, 40%. Now, once again, it's pretty strong, pretty heavy. So what I'll do is, once again, I'm going to add a mask to it. Click on my brush tool, paint black to hide, and I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller, and I'm just going to kind of like feather out these edges a little bit. Once again, I'm at 10% of my opacity. I'm going to feather it out a little bit because maybe it is a harsher sun that is coming down, and we're just playing around to make it look like this is where it belongs. Great. Maybe bring it up a bit. Maybe it was a little darker there. And that's it. Just playing around. Still on the shadow, on the mask, and playing around. That's it. I could always go back to the path and play with the path. Add more points, whatever I want. That's how I feel I have more control over the shadow that way because it's a path, but it's up to you how you want to do yours. Now, the last one I'm going to do here as well is with the human. So I am going to, once again, I just want to show you, you could duplicate it, double click, color overlay black. Okay, there it is. Now I can do a few different things here. Once again, right click or edit, free transform, and I have all these options: scale, rotate, skew, distort, perspective, warp. I'm just going to, once again, flip vertical. And there it is. And now the idea is there. I could always warp it and play around. But what I want to do, I want to skew it just to show you that it is an option. Skew. And I can kind of like skew it over, look like there is a shadow. Now I do need to connect it. So that's kind of an interesting piece too. But once again, I'm just going to delete that. I'm going to make a path instead. Just connect, connect. And I know roughly, I'm kind of moving them this way to the right. This one I kind of went down. I should keep those consistent. And there I go. Same idea. I'm going to bring it down a little bit in percentage. I'm going to make it a mask. Add a mask to that. There it is. I click on the mask and I'm going to paint. Maybe make it a little bit bigger and slowly kind of do that. Now they should all be similar. Of course, my shadows, but now at least it looks like things are actually making a little bit more sense here. So am I finished? Yes, not really. Can I play more? Yes, 100% I can. Do these look better now that they're in the scene? Yes, than what they were. So once again, I'm going to also group everything. This is super important as well. Make sure you group all your layers together. So I'm going to group everything that is containing my human, my 3 adjustments, clipping masks, my main pixels, and my shadow. Command G, or drop down and group from layers. And I'm just going to call this human. So there's all, once again, of course, I have issues with spelling. And there is, it's orange for some reason. That's okay. Let's make it red again. And there's my human. I'm going to do the same thing with all of the natural elements. I'm going to group them. Command G. And I'm going to call that one turtle, or I can call that natural. It's up to you. I'm going to select all the elements all the layers that deal with my unnatural element. Command G. Or Control G on a PC, of course. And I'll just do that as toast. And there I go. So now I have all my human there, all my turtle there, all my toaster, and my landscape on its own, which of course I could also group that and just say landscape. I like to do that. And I can actually get rid of my background. I don't need it. So there I have all my elements here in one artboard, and I could play around. All right. So once again, could I shut these off and see kind of what it did for my human? Did it look better? Yes, I think it did a better job. And you can now start playing around. Could I make the toaster blend better? Yes. Can I do all these? Yes. Now, the other part of this I want to show you is actually if you want to play around a little bit more with each individual object, like, I want to change up the color of the shirt, or I want to get rid of this. Now, that's the one I want to focus on here. I can play around with doing that with content aware, or I'm going to use this remove tool. I love this remove tool. I've been using it a lot lately. It does a great job using AI to understand what's going on in the image with all the pixels. And then what the remove tool does, it will actually remove, but also utilize the pixels in the image to help blend it in. So what I'm going to try to get rid of all this grass. Let's just see what happens. I'm going to click and drag. Now, the larger the selection you have, the longer it's going to take, and maybe not as good a job. All right, it did a really good job removing. It takes similar pixels and plays around. It did a fantastic job. So I was really happy with that. However, that was destructive. It applied those elements directly to my landscape, to the pixels. Now, yes, I have the pixels up here properly. Anyways, I could just go back and fix them or bring them back if I really wanted to. It did such a great job, but instead I'm going to undo that. Now, what I could do instead to make my remove tool non-destructive, what I can do, I'm going to add a new layer at the top, so nothing there. I'm going to use the remove tool on this layer, but here in my control panel for that tool, I'm going to sample all layers. And now when I do the exact same thing, I'm going to click this. What it will do, it'll put this on the new layer, which I could shut off, turn on, and once again, my original pixels are still intact. All right, not too sure what happened there. It is non-destructive, which is great, but it did a pretty bad job of that. So, but that's okay. I just at least want to show you that. Now that can occur, obviously, but yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe I painted over something a little too much. Either way, that's okay. I'm going to shut that off anyways. Another way we could do this, not only with the remove tool, is we could also do this with our content aware. So I'm going to click on, I'm actually going to get rid of that because that didn't do a great job. I'm going to click on my landscape. I'm going to click on my lasso tool, and I'm just going to select the area that I kind of want to get rid of. It doesn't have to be this. It could be even this little area here or these little bushes here. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to play around. Now to access content aware, which takes pixels and tries to fill it in, instead of me using the clone stamp and trying to fill this in, which would be a nightmare, I'm going to go to edit and content aware fill. Now this opens up a whole new option for me. What I see on the left hand side is my current state, my current pixels. On the right hand side here, what I see is what it's doing, how it's trying to fix it. And once again, not doing the best job, but it's trying. And I have some other options here, but mainly what you see here, you see the green. The green is what it's taking from. And if I want to remove some of that, I see what's going on here. It's doing okay, not doing a great job. I could actually start to remove some of the pixels that I want, that it's trying to take from. It's trying to take, well now remember, it's just on the landscape. So it's not actually taking from the turtle. It's actually just pulling from the landscape. So imagine the toaster and the human aren't there. But as I slowly start to take away, I'm just holding on the brush, clicking and dragging. This is going to start to change and what's going to show me what it's doing. So if I want a little bit more, I can bring it back, hold down Option, you can paint the green back, and then it slowly changes. But once again, this isn't really doing a great job at the moment. There's so many textures going on. I chose such a big area. This is going to have a little bit of a tougher time trying to figure that out. So the one option for me that worked best was the remove tool. That worked really, really well. Either way, I just wanted to show you those two options. Remove tool, content aware. Content aware actually does usually a great job, but right now he's having a little bit of trouble. Yeah. The good thing about content aware is it's non-destructive. If I was happy with this, let's pretend I was happy with this. I would say output to new layer. I say okay. And what it does, Command D to get rid of the selection, it adds its own layer with just the cover up. So that would just be the cover up part. So that's a great way to keep it non-destructive. So if I wanted to do that, I could. So the remove tool works really well. The non-destructive part of it should work better, but I don't know what happened there. That was probably something I did. And then the content aware generally works well, but this is a very kind of complex area. The last few things I want to show you here. What if I put a blending mode over top of the entire thing? What if I took a large fill and then of course just played around with a blending mode, and that might help me blend things in a little bit better. So with the blending mode, I'm going to grab a shape. Now I could do this a couple different ways. I could actually an adjustment layer and add a solid color, and it adds an entire solid color. I could change it whatever color I want. And I'm just going to play around with the blending mode. Now I'm going to make this, let's say blue, just for whatever reason. I could change it around anytime I want. And I'm just going to hover through these blending modes. As I go through them, it'll change some things. Now, the first set is just normal, not much changes. The second set, it makes everything darker. The third set makes everything lighter. The fourth set is contrast, where it makes some things lighter, some things darker. So the lighter ones get lighter and the darkers get darker. The difference, obviously, we change that up, which could make, once again, this can give you some really cool composition idea. Actually, right there, that gives me a really cool composition idea. And then you play with our utilities, the hue, saturation, color, and luminosity. Those can do a pretty great job too. So once again, these can give you some ideas. Right now, maybe I'll play around with, I'll play around with either one here, but what I could do is I could always offset with the balance. So maybe I'll choose multiply and I'll bring it together here. And once again, I could always still double click on the color, change to whatever color I want, and play around. And potentially it might help me bring in the all these elements together in an interesting way, make them blend in or harmonize them a little bit better in this scene. So that's another option you could have if you want to use blending modes. That's totally great. But we've done our adjustment layers, clipping masks, layer masks. So hopefully that helps kind of bring all these together. I think actually, from where it was to where it is now, I think it actually looks pretty cool. Now the last thing I have to do is I can play around with my type. I do need to bring some type in. I'm just going to copy and paste the type I had from before. I can be serious. I can be silly. I could be humorous. I could be whatever I want. I'm just kind of having some fun with it. But remember, it's kind of like an ad. So with that being an ad, I kind of want to make it seem like, hey, here's the message I'm trying to deliver. Here's the picture I'm using to deliver that message. And potentially, if you also want to, I just kind of made a silly little logo here. You can also play around with, a logo. It could be real. It could be fake. If you want to be smart, your own original artwork, your own original logo, it's not a bad idea. Now, what I would do for my next compositions, which I'm not going to show you here, what I would do, I'd play around more. I'd make the turtle bigger. I'd make the toaster really small. Maybe I'd make the human coming out of the toaster. Like, really have fun with it, play around. Maybe I'd introduce a new landscape, whatever the case is. Maybe I'd have all new type for each one. I suggest you do that. Maybe a different message for each one. That's a very smart, creative way to play around. This is the idea behind the compositions. Now, really quickly, just to mention this, I'm not going to play around with the compositions, but what I will do is pretend that I'm really, really happy with my first composition. Let's pretend. I made another 2, they looked great, but I'm really happy with this one. What I want to do now is I want to take all the elements here and bring them onto my Instagram and also bring them onto my Facebook and make them work. So I'm actually going to show you this part. So now that they're all grouped, so maybe I'll take all this information, I'll just call this like the brand. So I just did a group layer there, brand. And now I'm going to take all these elements, and once again, I could just click and drag them down here because they're all selected. Hold on, Option, click and drag them down onto my artboard here, which may or may not work. Oh, it did work. And once again, no layers went out to the top, so that means everything got selected and connected to the Instagram. Look, it all worked out. However, bit of an issue. I do have all the elements loose, meaning I can play around with them. I can move them around. So obviously, I'm going to do that. I'm going to click on my type. Maybe my type needs to be a little bit over more. Maybe my toaster now, because it's all grouped, it's so much easier. Maybe my toaster needs to move over a little bit. And maybe my turtle needs to move a little bit too. And maybe I need to shrink the turtle down a little bit. Now, the idea here is you do need to keep these consistent. The look needs to be consistent. I'm going to take my human. I'm going to move my human over as well. There we go. And now my human is there as well. Now there is consistency here, which is great. I'm going to move my brand over. Sorry, I keep on hitting the, selecting the side of the artboard, which is obviously connecting to the artboard. So be mindful of that as well. And maybe I just need to move that over. Maybe I just need to use my arrows instead of that because it's giving me a little bit of trouble, and that's okay. So there I go. Now I could maybe actually say, you know what, maybe I'll put the logo here, put the logo here. Now there is still consistency in that. I don't have to have everything exact. Obviously, as you see, I move things around because now the tortoise is a bit of an issue. The tortoise, my apologies, I'm not too sure what it is. I will take the turtle and I will have to move it now a little bit closer to make sense that it's kind of in this direction here. So now that's what I want to do. I want to take these elements and make them fit in. This one I'm going to get rid of. I don't need that. I'm going to make them fit into my other workspaces. And it's the same with the Facebook. It's a different dimension, so it's a little trickier. Now, instead of taking these dimensions or these elements and layers I have on Instagram, which I moved around and played around with, and I'm actually going to take all these and right click and make them green just like that. I'm going to go back up to my workspace and start again with these elements that have not been touched and bring them down onto my workspace here for the Facebook workspace. I'm going to hold down Option, click and drag, and make sure they're inside of this one here. Now, some came outside. That's okay. What I can do, I could select them because now they went up to the top. Human, I'm going to bring my human into my Facebook, and there it is. My human automatically gets snapped in. Great. I'm going to bring in my turtle. So once again, I tried to drag them in, and Photoshop said, they kind of don't fit in the workspace. I got to put them somewhere because I don't know where you want them. So it puts them all the way at the top of your layer panel, which is totally fine. So once again, the turtle, I'm going to bring in as well. And once again, it just snaps it, brings it right in. And same with the toaster. I'm going to reorganize these. Brand goes at the top. And then the human up top. And then make sure that you don't put them inside each other. And that's it. I'm good. Oh, sorry. This brand needs to go in there as well. And there we go. Okay, so now I can zoom in, Command plus. I can now try to make this consistent again. So I'm gonna, maybe after the landscape, I need to shrink down. Yeah. There I go. Maybe a little bit more like that. I need a little bit more of that foreground. The toaster, I will bring down here and I'll have to shrink it down. Now remember, the consistency does need to stay the same. So the turtle obviously cannot be that big. So I need to shrink it down relative to the toaster. And same with the human. I need to shrink her down as well. And now actually maybe that frames it a little bit better too, because with my type, that's actually kind of interesting. My type is there, and maybe my type needs to be brought down a little bit. I'll go to my character panel. And maybe that needs to change too. Maybe the layout of my type needs to change. It could potentially. And the word toast, wherever that is, there it is. Command T, just to help me find it. And I could bring that over here. And maybe actually now I have space again. I could bring it over here. And it's still consistent looking, which is great. Okay, so what did I do? I brought in all my elements that I found online, or you could take the pictures yourself. That's a great idea to take the pictures yourself, or maybe take some of the pictures, find some of the other ones. It's entirely up to you, found or taken. I'm going to bring all my elements into one of the workspaces, remove the background, and try to make them harmonize, fit into this space using blending modes, adjustment layers, clipping masks, and layer masks. Then I'm going to take all these elements and bring them into the other workspaces and play around in different ways, other ways. Then I'm going to take the one I love best, and I'm going to bring those elements into my Instagram, make them work, and into my Facebook and make them work, lay them out slightly differently. But they have to be consistent. We can see that all these are consistent looking. They all look the same. Now I'm almost done. So once again, and make sure, I say this too, make sure that the layers are all the same color. So when I copied them in, they also copied in the colors. Which color was this? This was seafoam. And there we go. Great. All right. So there's two ways now that I can play around and export these. So obviously I'm going to save the PSD, which I haven't yet, which you should. Save it, last name, first initial section number, underscore collage. If I go to File and Export and save for web, well, this is not going to help me because I have artboards now. Because all my artboards are here, Save for web does not work for us anymore. We need another option because we have artboards. Look what it's going to do. Instead, it's actually going to save the entire piece as one big picture. I don't want to do that. So instead, I'm going to cancel. I'm going to show you two ways on how to do this. File, Export, and Export As. Export As recognizes artboards and will allow you to choose different artboards and save them in different ways. So this is up to you if you want to use this option. I could select all of them, or I could say, you know what, I just want Facebook, Instagram, Workspace 1, 2, and 3, potentially if they were done correctly. And I want you to save them as JPEGs, PNGs. JPEGs work very well here, but PNGs are totally fine as well. I could make sure that your quality is the best. I could change the dimensions, which I do not want to do, keep them all the exact same. And that's kind of it. Then you would export, and it would only export these artboards as the proper sizes, as individual JPEGs or PNGs, and you submit those. Beautiful, done. There is another way to do this. So you get export, you're done. And remember, it's going to remember the name. Each file will be remembered, it'll have that file name, which I'm going to show you in just a second. The other way to quickly save each individual workspace as its own flattened JPEG or PNG is we will select the workspace, select the artboards, the ones you want. We do not need to export the individual unnatural, human, natural landscape. I'm going to see them in your PSD, so you do not need to show me that. What you could do instead, click on your drop down and look at this. Quick export as JPEG. Now mine changed by default. It's quick export as PNG. Where you change that is File, Export, Export Preferences, and you can save it now to a PNG or a GIF. Like I said, I'm just going to put it back to PNG. That's what it is by default, but you can change it there if you want to. Once again, File, Export, Export Preferences, and it brings you to your Preferences panel, which is up here anyway, under Settings, and you could change it. So I'm going to cancel that. So I selected all the artboards that I want to export. Quick export is PNG. Desktop, I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call it my final, which remember, you have to save all these in a properly organized project folder. I'm going to create, and I'm just going to say, now I'm not saving any names. I'm just going to open, and that is it. I'm just going to wait for it to finish. There it is, final. And there they are. Now, obviously, these two workspaces are not complete, and this is what you would submit. They look great. That is how we're going to fill and play around with the collage assignment, and how we can easily bring in our elements, make artboards, compose in our artboards, move elements around, use adjustment layers, blending modes, clipping masks, and layer masks to help us with this assignment. So here's everything complete for me, what I did. So what I did was, once again, I just showed you these, but I added some more, two more compositions, just playing around, having fun, doing a little more, treating it more like an ad, having fun with different typefaces, obviously, and different wording, kind of being silly with it, of course, but also really changing up the look too. This is still the same background, but playing around with it a little bit more, and like I said, just being silly, but having some fun and making sure I can still see everything and everything makes sense, but it should still be harmonized in a sense that it all kind of belongs together. But some of the blending modes I played with were a little more extreme, but once again, I'm just having fun, just trying things out in Photoshop. One other thing I wanted to mention, a little extra tip here, is using blur. If something's a little bit further away and you want to show that it's kind of, a little further away, it would be a little bit blurry. And what you could do, I'm going to shut this off for now. I just on this particular human at the moment because it is close. And actually, I also changed the color of the shirt on here. I was going to change up the color of some other things, but you can change that too if you'd like, of course. What I can do is, click on whatever element you want that's maybe a little bit further away, and you could add a little bit of a filter, a little blur to it. So here's my blur, and I'll just do a little Gaussian blur. Now, too much, you got to be careful because it's not that far away. But if you want to kind of loosen up the detail and make it seem like it's even further away, you blur it. Now, if you've made it really close, a bigger image, and you really scaled it up where you shouldn't, it will be blurry. And there's obviously ways to make it a little bit more crisp, which I don't really recommend using sharpen or unsharp mask, but there's that option too. So, playing around with the more or less, not the depth of field necessarily, is I'm kind of happy with this landscape that it's very crisp up top and still in the back. We could play around with those elements as well. Let me actually do that to the background just to show you. So here in my landscape, if I wanted to do this as well, actually, let me do it on this landscape here. If I wanted to show a little bit more blur in the background, I could do a little bit of a mask here. So when I am adding filters, as I didn't do to this particular element, I should make it a smart object. So that way I have access to smart filters. So if I make it, where are we here? Convert to smart object. Now it's a smart object. And now if I go to filter and let me add a blur, Gaussian blur onto the background, I can actually blur out now I'm looking at the background, not here. This I'm going to mask out. But now that I have this background there, that's great. I say, okay. And now with the smart filter, not only does it allow me to go back to the exact settings of my Gaussian blur, not only does it allow me to shut off the effect, the blur, I could also have a mask here and mask out parts of the blur, which is really, really cool. So I'm going to make a very large mask or brush here. I'm going to make, say, let's start with 25%. And I'm just going to make I'm going to make the foreground, and I'm going to bring it back to its full sharpness. And I will slowly, with 10% now, slowly kind of fade it out so the background is still blurry. And that's kind of it. Now, of course, I could make the sky a little less blurry too, so it look like it's kind of close as well. The parts of it are close to me as well. Go back up to 25 and kind of bring that up there too. So now it's kind of like the sense of where this is really close, fine detail, and then as we get closer, or a little further away, I should say, it gets blurrier and blurrier, and really making these pop a little bit more. Now, once again, zoomed in, it doesn't look great. I could have played around with them more shadow here and played around, but we're just having some fun, just playing around. I would touch this up a lot more if this definitely was for a job. But generally just having fun. I just want to show you a few extra tips with blur, smart filters, and playing around with blending modes. But this is more or less what our final will look like, where you're going to have your 4 final untouched pieces. Remember to keep your layer masks intact. Some people, when they make a layer mask, they will mask it and then flatten it, but we don't want that. We want to preserve all our original pixels, so these ones will not be touched. And even in your layers, you should label them all. Mainly what should be layered is your grouped layers, and the actual element should be the name of it, or like I said, natural, unnatural, human, and landscape. So be sure to label those.